Okay, so this is a talk I gave back in March for a little seminar that was held online. And this is a picture of wood being taken to a biomass power plant in the cover of Night in Slovakia by a dear colleague of ours who runs Wolf Forest Protection Movement, or is one of the people who runs it. The Paris Agreement, and again, sorry, I'm going to go fast so you can ask me questions later. The Paris Agreement asks for a balance of anthropogenic emissions and sinks by mid-century. So this is the net neutrality goal for mid-century, which means that sinks, mostly forests, have to be taking up close to 100% of emissions. Right now, they're taking up like 6%. This is the trajectory for global emissions. These are a bunch of different modeling runs through time, and basically only the blue trajectories are the ones that are livable scenarios. And of course, this latest IPCC report that came out a couple of days ago says that we are very close to blowing it. So we have to reduce emissions quickly, but then we also have to increase uptake. We need net negative emissions, which means we need forests to suck carbon out of the air. Zooming in, you can see how fast we need to be doing that. So we all know that trees are the answer. So why is it that countries are burning wood for renewable energy as wood chips that are, green wood that's chipped right out of the forest, or wood that's turned into pellets, and sometimes mill residues as well. Power plants and residential heating are the two main ways that wood is being burned, and also in the industrial sector, like at sawmills and paper mills, they burn wood waste to make heat and power. Policies treat biomass as zero emissions, although in reality, the physical reality is it emits more CO2 than fossil fuels. So a pathway to net zero emissions looks like this, which means that fossil fuels are decreasing. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving, I hope you can, but fossil fuels are reducing on this top line. The forest carbon sink is also going down, which means it's getting more negative, which means it's taking more carbon out of the air, because emissions are a positive number, but carbon taken out of the air is a negative number. So we want more and more negative numbers. And then the net emissions, which is the sum of those two things, are decreasing. So that's what a trajectory would look like toward net zero emissions. But burning biomass actually increases emissions, and these are real data from different from the U.S. and other places. A biomass steam turbine burning green chips emits more than the average U.S. coal fleet. A subcritical coal turbine, which is a very efficient coal plant, is even less, and of course, gas combined cycle is even less than that. So, 3 times or more what a really efficient gas plant is emitting. For heating, boilers for heating, burning wood pellets also emit more than gas or oil. And the Drax power plant, which is this huge plant that you may know about in the UK, is burning wood pellets, and it's only slightly more than coal because the wood pellets are dried and they're a very burnable fuel, as opposed to green chips, which are a very inefficient fuel because they're wet. So dried wood pellets emit less CO2 at the stack because they burn more efficiently, but they emit a tremendous amount of upstream CO2 in the processing, drying, and transport of those wood pellets. Biomass harvesting is degrading the carbon sink in the EU. Sorry. So this is just to show the covariance of these two factors. CO2 is increasing from biomass burning, and this green line, which is the forest carbon sink, is going up. Remember how I said it should go down if we want to be on a pathway toward net neutrality by mid-century? Well, in fact, it's going up. That means the sink is getting weaker. We're sequestering less carbon in forests every year. And remember that I said that net zero means that 100% of emissions are offset by sinks. Well, here's the percent fossil emissions currently offset by the whole land sector, with most of that uptake coming from forests and a little bit from some other sectors. So you can see it's around 6% right now, and it's actually going down. So we want that line to be going up. Forest harvesting in different countries, we see is increasing, and also biomass CO2 from burning biomass is increasing because an increasing share of forest harvesting is going toward biomass burning. So here we see CO2 from burning wood, CO2 equivalent of all wood harvesting, and then again, the green line is the forest carbon sink. Not negative. Denmark is actually above the zero line. Denmark's forests are a source of carbon instead of sink for carbon. Estonia, big maker of pellets, burn a lot of wood there and they make a lot of pellets, losing their carbon sink. Latvia, the biggest pellet producer in Europe, also losing their carbon sink. Massive, massive loss. It was around 20 million tons. So these are thousands of tons. So 20,000 tons is at 20 million tons. So this was around 20 million tons in 1995. Now it's around zero. Slovakia also. And then just this bar showing that the reported biomass use, the official data, which is this line, which I was using, doesn't match what was inventoried from other studies that went out and really looked carefully. They found that actual biomass use was double what was being officially reported. This paper was published by the Joint Research Center, finding that there was a big increase in harvested forest area and that wood-based bioenergy was one of the drivers of increased harvesting. So there's a loss in forest, increase in clear cuts, and an increase in biomass loss, abrupt increase in the recent years compared to just a few years before. So a massive increase from bioenergy. Unfortunately, despite all this, biomass gets 0 CO2 rating in the EU's Renewable Energy Directive, which is the thing we're working on, and the emissions trading program. And there it is, right in black and white, highlighted in pink. Emissions from the fuel in use shall be taken to be 0. However, European Commission scientists acknowledge that burning biomass emits carbon quickly, whereas it takes a long time to grow trees back. So what they say is that the use of certain forest biomass feedstock for energy purposes can lead to substantially reduced or even negative greenhouse gas savings compared to the use of fossil fuels. So that's kind of a backwards way. So negative greenhouse gas savings means positive emissions. So what they're saying here is that burning biomass from the forest is emitting as much carbon as fossil fuels over 20 to 50 years or even up to centuries, depending on the feedstock. This is a Canadian study showing a scenario for burning biomass where trees harvested for energy compared to coal. So if emissions were the same as coal, it's where these lines cross the 0 line. So the best case scenario, net emissions are only get back to equivalent with coal after around 80 years. Under the worst case scenario, still increasing after 100 years, just like the EC study said. And what this means is I showed you the stack emission data that's greater than fossil fuels, but don't forget that each and every year that a biomass plant or even a wood stove operates, it's burning more, it's emitting more and more CO2, and the trees are growing back, but very slowly. So the time lag between emitting and the cumulative emissions over years and years and years versus the cumulative carbon accumulation from trees growing back. Eventually that gap does get closed, but it takes decades to centuries for it to close. This is the result of a bunch of different studies that the JRC, the Joint Research Center, which is the European Commission's top science shop, put together, looking at the impacts of burning different kinds of residues and also making plantations. So they did not even look at the impact of burning whole trees in this study. They only looked at burning residues, which is the tops and branches left over after saw timber harvesting, which are assumed to decompose and just, kind of go away in the forest. And so people say, well, let's just burn them because they're going to decompose anyway. But what they determined was when they looked at the ecosystem impacts of collecting and burning residues and the climate impacts. So the ecosystem impacts are here on the top and the climate impacts are over here on the left. Over here in this red box, burning forest residues, which is coarse woody debris, is scenario 1. So this 1 corresponds to here, coarse woody debris removal, is high risk for ecosystems and high risk for the climate, meaning that it has greater or equal emissions to fossil fuels for 100 years or forever. So that's also in line with what I just showed you, those other studies. So this is just even burning stuff that was just lying on the ground has this impact. The Renewable Energy Directive has a lie built into it, which is it says that burning biomass fuels in the electricity sector and the heating and cooling sector in order to ensure high greenhouse gas emission savings compared to fossil fuel alternatives. But we know that's not true because we just saw all this data, including from the JRC, which is the European Commission's own science shop, which says burning wood, forest wood, increases emissions compared to fossil fuels for decades to centuries. And yet here in the red, they're saying it actually ensures savings compared to fossil fuels. So I trust the scientists, not the policymakers who wrote this. EU is spending a lot of money on biomass, more than 6.7 billion euro subsidizing biomass in 2017 in just 15 member states. That's money that could be used to support wind and solar. Wood burning, well, biomass as a whole, the solid red line, has increased a lot over recent years. This is kind of an old graph. I'm sorry, it only goes to 2016, but this is all biomass, and then this is solid biomass. So this includes liquid biofuels up here, the solid line, but the dotted line is solid biomass. And then if we zoom in on solid biomass, we see that solid biofuels are mostly wood, fuel wood, wood residues, and byproducts. And that's that red line. You can see it's increased dramatically in recent years. And about half of that is mill residues, and about half of that is coming directly from forests. Here's an example of a coal plant in Europe, in France, that's been converted to burning wood. The coal pile is still there. They're still actually burning some coal, but they're trying to convert to wood, and this is what their wood yard looks like. In much of the wood burned in European coal plants is coming from the USA. And the wood pellets are made and then made over here and then shipped there. So this is a picture of what that looks like. A beautiful hardwood forest next to a river in North Carolina. Then it's clear cut in 2013. And then we see that it's been replaced by a pine plantation, which is a sterile monoculture. It doesn't have any of the biodiversity or ecosystem values that this beautiful, lush, biodiverse forest had before it. And that 27-hectare cut, which I measured using the measuring tools on Google Earth, would run the Drax power station for 3 hours and 24 minutes using wood pellets. So you can see how incredibly wasteful this is. This is what those cuts look like in North Carolina after a forest has been harvested for wood pellets. And that qualifies as sustainable under the European Union's Renewable Energy Directive and will continue to do so even under the new so-called reforms that they are proposing and that we continue to oppose. The Europe and the UK also get wood from Canada. Canada has long claimed that their wood pellets were only made from sawmill residues, but we can see very clearly here, there's some sawdust over here, sure, from like making, wood for building houses and stuff, and there's sawdust left over, so they burn some of that. But we can also see that these are whole trees piled up at the plant. And I took these pictures myself up in Prince George in British Columbia, and saw these huge trucks loaded up with trees. And they are also planning on cutting in the inland rainforest, which is a globally rare ecosystem with beautiful huge trees and deep carbon-rich soils. This particular picture doesn't have any of the really big trees in it, but you can see PBEC is Pacific Bioenergy Block Boundary. So they had marked this area for cutting the forest down to turn it into wood pellets. In the European Union, of the wood burned for energy, about 60% is residential use. So the majority of the wood being burned is burned for residential use. And this is probably actually an underestimate of the actual use, given how poor the data are, the official reported data. So this purple line is total wood burned for energy. The brown line is residential use of solid biofuels, which is mostly wood. And then this dotted line is the percent of total wood that is residential. So you can see it's come down a little bit, but it's still around 60%. Residential wood burning is increasing dramatically in some member states. This is Italy and Germany. You can see this huge increase in residential wood burning, and a lot of that is wood pellets that are made in Europe and shipped to Italy. And this is because of incentives and because they get to count it as renewable energy. And it's just so much easier to, burn a bunch of wood in home wood stoves and report it to the EU as renewable energy than putting up, windmills or solar panels. There's a huge export market just for firewood, not even pellets, but actual firewood gets shipped all over Europe. So this is a picture of a Spanish retailer that sends it into the UK so people can burn it to have a nice fire in the evening. Residential wood pellet trade within Europe. This was a page just from a website that I went to where they talked about these are the kinds of pellets that are in bags that are burned residentially. So look at where these were coming from. Serbia, beech forests from Serbia, more Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Romanian fir, beech, conifers. So you can be pretty sure that they are sourcing from places that don't have very good enforcement of environmental laws. And a lot of forests are being felled for residential heating. Here's a small pellet plant. This is a video from a small pellet plant, a promotional video in France. They're very, very proud of making pellets for people to burn in their homes. And these are the size of the trees that they're using. The Renewable Energy Directive, really actually encourages the use of biomass, and it's really creating a huge market for low value wood. And we don't know where a lot of it's coming from. A lot of it, in fact, this is an old slide. I mean, I should have used the new, it's actually up to 20% now of the wood. The JRC in its most recent report reported that 20% of the wood, they don't know where it's coming from. But we can take a pretty good guess. So here's a national park in Hungary that's been logged partially. And according to the World Wildlife Foundation, the approximately 600 cubic meters of timber, largely suitable only for for firewood or fiber like pellets, due to the high age of the trees. So these are not trees that are going to be turned into furniture. These are trees that are going to be turned into pellets and burned in people's homes. Here's more illegal logging in Hungary. This is in a Slovakian park that I actually hiked in a couple of years ago, and it didn't look like this when I was there, but this was taken shortly after. When you see low diameter wood going out of the forest like that, what that means is probably going to be turned into energy wood. In Hungary, in Romania, in the Carpathians, we see massive, massive clear cuts that are illegal. So this is satellite imagery from 2011, intact here. And 6 years later, in 2017, huge clear cuts appearing in every valley. And that's what that looks like on the ground. And they actually tracked some of the wood that was being taken from these illegal clear cuts to these wood pellet manufacturing plants. So here's some old growth beech that's going to a pellet mill in Romania, again, serving the domestic market. The Siebes sawmill in Romania. So those clear cuts that I showed you in this little inset map are around here with this little pin. And then here's the plant. So you can see they're not that far away from each other. And, you know, they are turning this stuff into pellets. So you're very familiar with that. And then this is another sign-on that we did years ago against the biomass energy industry. Is a very strong science-based statement that all these different groups signed on to, you know, like 4 or 5 years ago. So that's my contact information. So hopefully you're still there.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for this. Wow. Super cool. Thank you for all of this.